Okay, everyone, I'm so sorry that I'm late. The traffic in Austin is atrocious. I was just, speeding home. No, I was trying to get home quickly in my Tesla, and I'm here and I'm joined by Joe
Hi guys.
Tegtmeyer. You probably can't tell us apart because we're basically wearing, you don't have the
I
flame.
don't have the old one.
Okay. Well,
You have the new one.
just disclaimer, Joe and I will both be down at Starbase for this next launch. And if you see me, I'm bringing a lot of shirts. So come up to me and you'll probably get one for free pretty easily because I have a lot of sizes, a lot of shirts. And yeah. So anyway, there's so much going on right now.
I know.
Obviously we have the next Starship launch that is expected to be on Monday. I'm going to head down on Sunday. I think you said you're going to head down on Saturday. We're going to be covering it again from Margaritaville, the same roof that we always stream on. Although I do have a pitch for you, Joe.
Oh, okay.
I was thinking that we stream on the roof and then immediately walk over to the park and get everyone's reactions who watched it at the beach.
Sounds like a plan to me.
And then interview Elon.
Yeah. The only thing just to keep in mind is what's that?
I don't
know. There's gonna be fireworks. Yeah, the only thing that's going to be really different about this launch is that it's late in the afternoon. So, so we won't be like getting up at the break of dawn.
I'm
we
so
won't
happy.
Be in the darkness. But on the same token, is it's going to be like, I don't know, almost dark by the time we get down to the park to talk to people.
That's true. You're right. Well, we are going to try to get, our favorite special guest for an interview, but
okay.
Nothing's confirmed on that. But I will try to get a post-launch briefing with Elon Musk again because, hey, why the hell not? But you see the title of this live stream, will NASA's SLS program be canceled? And this is something that, people have talked about for a while now as a potential, maybe it should be scrapped. But now we're seeing some pretty real evidence, at least from Eric Berger, who's a pretty strong source, that internally this is becoming, something that actually might happen.
Yeah, well, we started getting a little bit of, whispers of this about a year ago when there was maybe not quite a year ago, but there was that congressional testimony and they were talking about SLS and whether or not they should go back to, what they were doing before. And, we had actually talked a little bit about that and had some reaction. And then, of course, we started getting the Office of Inspector General reports that started streaming out this spring through the summer about various parts of the Artemis program, specifically with the SLS, especially the 1B rocket, the next one that they're working on, the launch platform for that rocket and some of the problems with that. Of course, Orion's having issues with its heat shield, and just overall, questions about the Lunar Gateway and whether that's going to be feasible or not. And then overall, just the management of the SLS program and whether or not it actually, I've been thinking about this a lot, does the SLS or the Artemis program as it is right now, is it structured to meet the objectives of which NASA has said, which is we're going back to the moon, we're going back to stay. And its budget is so high and it's getting more and more expensive for all the various parts that it's basically becoming unsustainable financially. And we're only going to be launching once every couple of years, which isn't really going back to stay. So, I think all of these factors are coming together now, and that may be what Eric is picking up. And of course, we just had an election, which is going to have some major impacts to the way the government works, way funding is working, and most likely how NASA is going to operate. So, yeah, I guess it's possible.
Yeah. And so just because we may need to inform some people, not everyone is on X. So there's just been so many breaking news developments in the past few days.
Right.
And let me see here. I actually put up a poll on my page today. NASA should cancel SLS, yes or no. We have over 2,000 votes and, a large majority, almost 87% saying yes. So just interesting. I know it's not like official or anything, but let's see if we can pull up Eric Berger's post that kind of this was what you were referring to yesterday, right? That kind of like tipped you off to this.
Yeah, me and a lot of other people. And,
it's been shared a lot.
Yeah, well, Eric's track record is pretty good. I think somebody put kind of like a checklist of how it goes. Is Eric reports stuff, people say, "Oh no, that's not true," and then other ones start reporting on the same thing, and then eventually it becomes true.
Okay, so this was actually just posted yesterday, so it really hasn't been long at all. It already has 1 million views or impressions. He says, to be clear, we are far from anything being settled, but based on what I'm hearing, it seems at least 50-50 that NASA's Space Launch System rocket will be canceled. Not Block 1B, not Block 2, all of it. There are other ways to get Orion to the moon. I mean, that is like bombshell breaking news.
It is. And, about a week or so ago, I was at the Earthlight Foundation New Worlds Conference that was down at Johnson Space Center, 2-day conference. And we talked a lot about, the state of the space program, funding, some of the contracts that are under consideration for replacing the ISS. And then we got into kind of the space policy parts of that. And one of the undertones at that time, and it was before the election, was what was going to happen to NASA, its budgets, and its programs. And there were a lot of people that were very worried about the direction that we might be going. And I think now we're starting to see some of that happening.
Well, so let's just throw out some, what if scenarios. And you're totally welcome to share your opinion. But Joe, if this gets canceled completely, obviously SpaceX is part of the human landing system portion of it. So what do you think will happen? How likely do you think it is that it's just going to get scrapped completely? And if it does, what is the alternative in your opinion?
Yeah, well, I guess the best thing to start off with is this is just my speculation and yours as well. And we're just sort of reacting to this. But, I think we talked about this before about the overall plan of how the Artemis was going to work and all the various parts and pieces that had to work together to make going back to the moon possible. And even then, it seemed pretty challenging, I guess. So it wouldn't surprise me if they go in and they relook at how the Artemis program is structured, whether they're going to whole scale cancel every single part of it, or if they're going to try to save certain parts. I think they may try to save certain parts of that. One of them is the Orion capsule, because I think if they could find a different launch platform, and Eric Berger's talked a little bit about, there's a possibility that I think they might be able to use a ULA rocket maybe and be able to launch the Orion capsule and use an upper stage that ULA has as well. That's possible. Some people are talking about maybe Falcon Heavy could do the same thing. But, the Orion is important because it's the only capsule or craft that's designed to re-enter the atmosphere at the lunar orbital velocities that are going to be encountered. And that's significantly higher than what you would encounter in low Earth orbit coming back from the ISS or so. And not even the Starship is designed to sustain that. So I think they may try to salvage that. But, there's another part of this, and I don't want to get into politics, but it is political. It's hard to split the two together. But
right.
On the one hand, President Trump has nominated or has said that Elon Musk is going to co-lead with Vivek
Ramaswamy.
Yes, Ramaswamy. And they're going to co-lead something called the Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE, with the goal over the next 18 months or so, or the 18 months from when the inauguration takes place, to slash a lot of the government spending and to address a lot of the government bloat and areas where they can be a lot more efficient. And so you're going to have Elon Musk on that advising the president, which is going to most likely talk about regulatory agencies such as NASA, NASA contracts that might be put into play if the Artemis program is canceled? And then who is going to get those contracts? Would it be SpaceX? And if so, is there a big conflict of interest there? And how is that going to be done? And how is it going to be done in a way that people will understand and people will support? So, so thinking about if Artemis is canceled or portions of it canceled, one of the likely outcomes would be that they use SpaceX a lot more, maybe a lot more of the Starship. Maybe it would be the launch platform. Maybe even it could serve as a role of an orbiting base or lunar station, and it can be the lander as well. And you're going to have Elon Musk and his company getting that. So I think that's going to be very challenging to see how this has worked.
Well, I want to ask you guys to comment. How many of you are familiar with this new DOGE Department of Government Efficiency? I don't know if everyone has read the statement, but you know what? Just in case, I'm going to read it so that we are all up to speed. Because again, this as well. So we had Eric Berger, who's a very trusted source, say, that there's these rumblings about SLS potentially being canceled. Yesterday, he wrote that. Right. And then yesterday as well, we have a statement from President Donald J. Trump. This is part of the Trump-Vance transition. It's pretty wordy, but in case you haven't heard it, I'm just going to read it. I am pleased to announce that the great Elon Musk, interesting title, working in conjunction with American patriot Vivek Ramaswamy, will lead the Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE, or I guess it's probably the similar pronunciation to the meme coin. Together, these two wonderful Americans will pave the way for my administration to dismantle government bureaucracy, slash excess regulations, cut wasteful expenditures, and restructure federal agencies essential to the Save America movement. This will send shockwaves through the system and anyone involved in government waste, which is a lot of people, stated Mr. Musk. It will become potentially the Manhattan Project of our time. Republican politicians have dreamed about the objectives of DOGE for a very long time. To drive this kind of drastic change, the Department of Government Efficiency will provide advice and guidance from outside of government and will partner with the White House and Office of Management and Budget to drive large-scale structural reform and create an entrepreneurial approach to government never seen before. I look forward to Elon and Vivek making changes to the federal bureaucracy with an eye on efficiency and at the same time making life better for all Americans. Importantly, we will drive out the massive waste and fraud which exists throughout our annual $6.5 trillion of government spending. They will work together to liberate our economy and make the U.S. government accountable to we, the people. Their work will conclude no later than July 4th, 2026. A smaller government with more efficiency, less bureaucracy will be the perfect gift to America on the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. I am confident they will succeed. Wow,
it's going to be a heck of a challenge, and this is a pretty big ask of Trump to see what Elon and Vivek will do. But like I said, this is going to play one way or the other, whether we like it or not. It's going to play into what happens with NASA Artemis program and what parts are saved, what parts are added, and how this moves forward.
Exactly. And so, we're somewhat political on this one just because it is having to do with this Trump-Vance transition, but we're here to talk about sort of these space impacts. Yeah. And one of the other ones, which I think everyone's well aware of, is, the FAA will probably have some sort of restructuring or something to where, they're not building giant rockets faster than they're doing paperwork. Right. So that's, one of the hopefully positive outcomes of this type of overhaul, but it really just remains to be seen. I mean, the way that this is written is so almost like, just brazenly optimistic and grandiose in many ways. And it's pretty out there. It's, well,
there's going to be a lot of stakeholders that are going to feel the effects of this, shall we say. And many of them are going to act like giant antibodies to this. So we're going to get a lot of fights goes on. And, the the thing is right now it's kind of high arching, all these words, it sounds, scary, it sounds big, whatever. But as soon as they actually start picking programs to cut, that's where the big pushback is going to be, because then now you have a target that people can shoot at.
Yeah.
And we'll see how that goes. But for the discussion that we're having here, it's NASA, what's happening with it, what's happening with the Artemis program, and you could expand that to the Moon to Mars program, the Mars Sample Return program, the ISS, the Starliner stuff. All of those are going to be affected by this. And then, as you mentioned, with the regulatory things like FAA, what's going to happen with that? Because, the discussion up until the election was that the FAA was under-resourced. They needed more people. They needed to be able to respond faster and have better programs to be able to handle the speed of like SpaceX or other commercial programs. Now we're going into, after the election, we're trying to cut, reform, and change. So I don't know how that's going to work together. And I don't know if anybody knows at this point in time.
Well, let's interact with some of our questions and comments from the audience. Stephen wants to know, couldn't they just dock Orion and Earth orbit on Starship and take it to the moon? That way Falcon Heavy could just lift it to orbit instead. Joe, what are your thoughts?
We have to look at all of the orbital dynamics and just the structures and all that stuff. But that being said, I think that may be possible because the Starship should be able to, with the docking mechanism, if it's made strong enough to be able to support the loads of doing the translunar injection burns and then orbital burns and all that, it is possible. But then again, why? I'm just thinking at the top of my head, why take the Orion all the way to the moon and back? Why not just leave it? I don't know. Maybe it's not possible to come back and do a rendezvous. Maybe that would be the thing. But all that being said, is that would change a bunch of things. For example, the Lunar Gateway is supposed to be into that near rectilinear halo orbit, which is kind of a long polar orbit, if you will, that has a long period way away from the moon and short periods of time close. And they chose that so that they could have good communication with the Earth. But there's a lot of problems with that particular orbit, one of which is that the opportunities to be able to take people off the moon in case there was an emergency and get them to the gateway quickly would really depend on when it happened. If you were to take the Starship and the Orion and put it into orbit, you could actually put it into orbit anywhere you wanted and not have to use that rectilinear halo orbit. You wouldn't need a space station because the Starship could act as that. And then if you put either Starlinks, or I think Intuitive Machines has just won a contract to put some satellites around the moon for communication. If you had that, you wouldn't need that orbit over the poles, and that could simplify things quite a bit. So yeah, I guess that would be possible, and then the Orion could come back with the astronauts, and then the HLS lander, either it comes back and goes into low Earth orbit and gets refilled again, or there's some other option. But yeah.
Well, because we've done a couple live streams about Artemis and some sort of audits of their workforce and a lot of problems with it being delayed, with it being over budget. I mean, what do you think is the sacrifice if it doesn't get scrapped?
Well, that's sort of an interesting question, is we've already spent billions and billions of dollars on various parts of the program. And, a reason why it's so expensive is that things have been distributed all over the country. If it were not to be canceled, then we're going to continue to have to spend a lot of money to keep it, going, to fix all the problems that still haven't been resolved. And it still doesn't solve that initial problem that I said about, does it sustain or does it meet the mission objectives of the Artemis program, which is go back to the moon and stay? And if it's not sustainable fiscally, and if it's not, more than once every couple of years, if we go back and we stay on the moon for a week or two, and then 2 years later come back, that's not really going to the moon and stay.
Right.
So I think, I think maybe it's time to say, let's get rid of the sunk cost fallacy. That's cut ties, and let's come up with something more sustainable and more, possible. And if they do that, I think we're going to see a much bigger role for commercial space, and SpaceX will play a big role in it. But I think, Blue Origin is getting ready with their New Glenn. They also have their lunar lander, which is a part of the HLS, or the NASA Artemis program. So they're already working on some of that, and they have some of the infrastructure that's going to the moon that they could still use. Axiom Space with their the space suits that they have, and some other things that they've been working on would be possible. When I was at that New Worlds conference, we were talking about who's going to replace the International Space Station, and you have Space Lab, you have Sierra Space, VAST, you have Axiom, and then they didn't talk about it there, but separate to that is you have the orbital wreath from Blue Origin. So, there's a lot of commercial capability that could be leveraged for that. One other thing to keep in mind is if it is canceled, that's going to have huge effects on our international partners too, especially with the Lunar Gateway, which is a international program.
Right. And thank you, by the way, Rodney, for the first super chat of this live stream. Here's $1 or $2 or $50 to help keep Ellie on the air. So thank you so much. I've seen you in many of my live streams, and I do appreciate your support. Hopefully, Joe and I will be able to bring you guys great coverage from down at Starbase. I'm going to bring the Starlink, and it'll be a little bit more exciting than our offices, but
well, looking forward to the Flight 6. Right now, the forecast is awesome.
Oh, good.
It's going to be sunny. It'll be late in the afternoon, low winds, some clouds, but not that much, and it won't be foggy. So we might actually see it.
Yeah, that was such a bummer. Not the last launch because we weren't there, but the previous one, we were pretty much, fogged out for that one. So
not only that, but it'll be getting close to sunset, so the sun will be on the complete opposite side. And I know a lot of photographers that cover Starbase. They're excited about the lighting that they're going to get from this particular launch. Yeah,
no, I'm so excited. I can't believe we missed the last one, but it's going to be awesome to be there in person. Doug says, and this is something that people have talked about, move FAA space oversight to NASA. FAA needs to concentrate on aviation. So is that, one of the outcomes that we're going to see with this Department of Government Efficiency? Hard to tell, but
at this point, it's really, really hard to tell. I don't know if this is completely related to this particular question, but it's sort of an insight that I heard when I was at that New Worlds conference. They were talking about space policy, and they were this was before the election, so we didn't know what was going to happen, but they were kind of postulating, if there were a Trump presidency and they were trying to figure out how to handle, say, the Artemis program, or how they would move forward, would they look to create another government agency? And the answer was probably not. That really wouldn't be effective, and it would probably delay things more than anything. And they eventually came up with an idea of something like a joint resolution from Congress that we're going to do X, Y, and Z, and then the president can just say, okay, go forth and do it. And when you go in that direction, then it cuts out the bureaucracy of a department. It's not a cabinet position of the presidency. It's just more of a joint resolution that they're all working together, and it might be able to be the way to go forward. So maybe they will do something like that will maybe address what's going on with the FAA. But like I said, before the election, the big discussion was resourcing of the FAA and getting more people. I don't think that's what the Department of Government Efficiency is going to be looking at. So I don't know. Maybe another thing that they could look at. It's kind of like with the ability to take people onto spacecraft. Right now, there's a waiver for, and I forget what it's actually called, but it's a waiver for regulation on having people on the rockets until they get more data, and that actually frees things up. And then maybe they will come up with another program where they split off certain kinds of rockets like development, and then it's much freer and a lot less regulation than a rocket that is considered operational. So I honestly don't know. It's just going to be very interesting to see what this new administration, what this Office of Government Efficiency is going to come up with, how that's going to affect all of these regulatory bodies, and with Eric's mention that SLS may get canceled, that's really throwing a big wrench into this whole program. And, one other thing that we have to think about is there's going to be some sort of national desire to beat China back to the moon. And of course, none of this is affecting China and its plans, and they're moving forward. And it looks like they're probably going to get astronauts or taikonauts landing on the moon sometime before 2030. So, we're almost 2025. That's a pretty late time to start with a completely new program.
But do we really care that much if they only beat us to landing on the moon?
Yeah, well, personally, I'm not sure if that is that big of a deal anymore. I mean, it's not like the space race back in the 60s where who was going to be first. We had the Cold War, us versus the Soviets and that kind of thing. I think now that we've done that, I don't know if it's going to have the same appeal to our population. However, there is still something to be said about who controls the high ground controls what's going on. And whoever gets there first establishes a base. They may start being able to dictate what happens, certainly on that region of the moon, if not all of it. So, I think there's going to be a lot of discussion about that, and whether or not that's the primary reason why we want to go fast, or as some have speculated, since it was actually the Trump administration that started the Artemis program in the first place.
What I thought.
They may want to get to the moon so that it's a political thing for themselves.
Right.
I think that despite the fact that SLS might get canceled, the Artemis program may be rethought, I still think that the Trump administration is going to want to get back to the moon, and they're going to do it as fast as possible.
I was going to say, how soon do you think that, Artemis would be canceled?
Well, if Elon and Vivek work as fast as Elon does in his companies, it could be like, within a month or two of the inauguration. I mean, They could just say, we're going to cut ties, we're going to rethink it, we're going to move forward. If that is the case, right now, the next program that is most developed to get us to the moon is Starship. So, going back to Flight 6 and what we're going to be seeing next year at SpaceX down at Starbase, it's going to ratchet up the importance of what's going on with Starship and all of the milestones that they still have to hit next year, regardless of whether Artemis is canceled or not, or if there's a change. For them to be able to take Artemis 3 as it is right now and land astronauts on the moon at the end of 2026, next year has got to be an absolutely incredible year for milestones. And frankly, nothing can go wrong. They have to go just like clockwork, and maybe have some luck beyond that too.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, do you think that now that we've had the announcement as of yesterday about DOGE, Department of Government Efficiency, and how involved Elon is, do you think that January, as soon as Trump is in office, we're just going to be like blindsided by 10 things or, changes?
Well, I'll tell you this, the election was just over a week ago, and not that I'm saying watch X or whatever, but it's been fascinating to watch on X how fast things have been happening in just this week, as far as announcements, plans, this DOGE thing, what they want to do. There's been a battle in the Senate to replace McConnell as the majority leader that concluded earlier today. And a lot, believe it or not, if you haven't been on X, you haven't seen they've been playing out a lot of the internal discussions on X to decide who it was. And they resolved that today already. So, I think they're going to try to move really, really fast to get all of the nominees in and be ready to go immediately. And if what we're seeing on X in just a week is any indication, it wouldn't surprise me if as soon as the hand is put down from the inauguration, we get just a flurry of announcements.
That's what I'm wondering is this just, warming up to what's to come? It feels like it.
I personally, I mean, I've been around a little bit longer than you, and I've seen a lot of different elections and a different administrations come in and what they say they're going to do and all that stuff. And probably the one that was the most energetic at first was Reagan's first inauguration, his first term, because they had a whole bunch of stuff that they wanted to do. And I remember a bit of that. This is so much more beyond even that. So who knows what's going to happen? But it's almost like they're putting out so much stuff that it's going to be very difficult to attack any one of them, because there's going to be all this flurry of activity all across the government.
Right. Stephen wants to know, would it not take an act of Congress to cancel SLS? I was under the impression SLS was congressionally mandated. I would think Artemis 2 will go on as expected.
Well, that I'm sure Congress is going to have to play a role. How big or small, I'm not sure. But I know that they're going to have to play a role. But it also looks like right now that the Republicans are going to have all three branches of the House, the Senate, and the presidency. And there's going to be lack of cohesion at some point. There's going to be infighting and all that. But if they all believe that this is a once in a lifetime opportunity to make huge change, and they realize that the only way to do that is to stick together, they may just come right out and say, you know what, we're going to cancel this and we're going to try something new because it's not fiscally sustainable. And that fits in with that whole DOGE thing about cutting waste, bureaucracy. And so again, I don't know, but I know that the shockwaves have only now just begun to go through the system.
But can we step back for a second? Are we in like a Simpsons episode that this thing is really called Doge?
I know. It's almost like, well, the simulation is real. Who would have thought?
I mean, it's kind of silly. Wow. I don't know, everyone in the audience, I don't know what your thoughts are on the election, but it sure has been unexpected, to say the least, all the things that are happening. And I think a lot more is to come.
Yeah. Well, if they put a whole bunch of stuff out, which is what they're trying to do, and they only get maybe 50% of that, that's still an enormous amount. But that you were talking, I think you were reading that statement from President Trump, and he said that the budget was like $6.5 trillion or something like that. That the DOGE thing is aiming to cut $2 trillion right off the bat. And that's trillion, not billion, not million, that's trillion. And that's like double to 3 times the entire DoD budget.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
That's crazy. I'm trying to get that recent video that they shared of the Starship edit, if I can find it. Because I do the highlights that they just released pretty recently, because I do want to talk about that.
Yeah. Well, I like that video. It's got a lot of great information in it, but we also know that Flight 6, although is generally following the same flight profile, which is why they are able to launch without having to worry about the FAA since they have that license, they have made a lot of different changes, and they're experimenting quite a bit with Flight 6. And I'm really looking forward to see how all that works. For your audience that may or may not realize, Flight 6 is also the very last of the first generation of the Starship.
Right.
And so because of that, and because they basically want to get all kinds of data, they're going to try all kinds of different stuff with the ship, particularly whether it's a relight the Raptors. They took a lot of heat shield tiles off. They're going to try a different flight profile. And even with the booster, they're changing some of the timing and stuff. So it's going to be pretty cool.
I've obviously known that it's later in the day, but in my head, for some reason, for planning purposes, I was still thinking like, oh my God, I have to get up at 5. I don't have to get up at 5. That's so amazing.
Yeah. Well, there's a couple other things about that too, is the road closure starts at 8 in the morning. So you could theoretically go out and be on the beach looking at the rocket that's going to launch later that same day and then leave. And the other thing is, in the past, the whole thing is done probably by like 8 or 9 in the morning, and you got the whole afternoon. And we went back out to look and see what's going on. In this case, it'll be dark. And who knows what we'll see if we could even go out there. You never know.
I know. I'm curious how everything is going to play out. Let's see here. I know you guys probably aren't sick of watching this. Play it again.
We're now down to 3 Raptor engines. We can see those chopsticks now in the air.
I swear I thought it was going to hit the tower.
I did too. I really did. Apparently, like, people are just saying this angle kind of made it also look a little bit more pronounced.
Yeah.
Ross wants to know, what flight cadence for Starship do you think SpaceX will achieve in 2025?
All right. Well, that's a great question, because Kathy Leaders recently was talking about what they're planning on doing in 2025. And she said a few things. One is that they want to catch the ship within the first 6 months. So let's just say spring. So that may be like, I don't know, say April, May, June, something like that. They also said that they were going to try to get up to 25 launches next year from Starbase. Now, that's going to require that EPA, the FAA and the EPA to approve that, because right now I think they're only stuck at 6, but that presupposes that that's going to be approved. And so that's twice a month, basically, which is incredible. So every 2 weeks, we'd be seeing one of these. And then Elon actually responded back to Kathy's post and said faster than that. So we will see. Now, to answer Ross's question, what do I think they will really achieve? I think it'd be a miracle if they do one a month. So we're talking, let's just say at 10 next year, which would be it'd be double what they did this year, a little bit more than double. But I think that's probably realistic. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think that they're definitely going to ramp up the cadence, and I could see that as well. I don't know if we're going to be able to make every launch if that's the case.
That's going to be crazy.
Yeah, we might as well just move down there.
Yeah.
No, I don't want to do that.
and there's another, possibility. There is signs that they're starting to work back at Roberts Road and the tower out at Cape Canaveral. So, who knows? Maybe by the end of the year, end of the summer, end of the year, maybe they'll be able to do something out of Florida too. I don't know. But one thing is for sure, going back to what happens to Artemis if they cancel it, and if Starship plays a much bigger role, they are going to have to do a lot of development flights. And, they're going to be in the version 2 of the Starship for a while next year. I don't know if that's going to be all next year or if they'll graduate to version 3. They have the they have the V3s of the Raptors that are coming online at some point. They also have to, you're making fun of me.
I'm sorry.
I know. I'm trying to be serious here, but no, but they have to show that they can catch the ship. They have to show that the ship can go into orbit and deorbit. They have to show that they can do in-flight refueling or refilling. They have to show that they can maybe reuse a booster. There's so much that they have to do that are huge, and none of those are guaranteed.
Right. Let's read some of the comments, because I was mentioning that I put up this poll with over 2,000 votes. Most people think that NASA should, in fact, scrap SLS. The new grid says NASA should, however, try to make a fully rapidly reusable rocket, what is the likelihood of that?
I would say 0. I think the way that they would do that is they would contract with SpaceX.
Exactly. I actually did respond to this, and I wrote LOL, and then I deleted it because I was like, I don't see that happening.
I think in general, I don't see NASA making their own launch system anymore. I think it'll all be contract.
Probably for the better. Deepak says, yes, they should. It's a burden on the American taxpayers. If America wants to be competitive in space technology, they should just give a fixed price contract to a private aerospace company to do the mission.
I do agree that fixed price contracts are probably going to rule the land. And that's going to make companies like Boeing, who has publicly stated that they can't make a profit with fixed price contracts and that they want to go back to cost plus. And they also recently said that if NASA, this is before the election, but if they went to fixed price contracts, they would not bid anymore.
Oh, wow. Well, Chris Cuneo says SpaceX is awesome, no question. However, they are not yet ready to get cargo and people to the moon. Falcon Heavy can't do it, and Starship is many alterations in years away. SLS could do it now, which I replied, if SLS is ready, then why does the timeline keep slipping? And Marcus House said, seems to be more Orion's heat shield launch tower support has been another huge problem.
Exactly. Well, I mean, that goes back to the whole OIG reports, and it's not just on one part of the Artemis program. It's on almost every single one of them. And as Marcus says, that launch tower, I think it was originally supposed to be like $300 million and ready to go like by 2022. Now it's almost $3 billion, and it won't be ready until like 2028 from what the OIG said, which means it's going to completely miss the Artemis 3 and probably Artemis 4. And, you know, so Marcus is very correct. And the Orion heat shield, as far as I know, NASA has not said that they have it fixed. They said that they understood the reasons why it had a problem, but they weren't going to let us know. And I know Eric Berger and several other people comment on that. It's like, where's the transparency here? Is
right.
You think you know what it is, but you won't tell us? Something's weird.
Well, I don't think that they want to tell us. Let's see. Change it up. Cancel gateway. Simplify the whole stack of missions.
Yeah, well, it's kind of what we talked about before. Is the gateway's got a bunch of problems besides being over its mass budget and being too expensive. It's going to be in an orbit that works for communication, but like I said, it's going to be very elongated, and it's going to limit the opportunities for somebody that has a problem, say on the surface, to be able to get back to it because of just the orbit. And another thing that is interesting, and it's because of how the Artemis program and the contracts worked and the timing of which hardware that they selected, is that the Starship docking to the gateway would mean that the gateway can't do its orbital maintenance. It doesn't have enough thrust to be able to keep its orbital trajectory correct with the Starship, because the Starship is like, it's kind of like a Volkswagen bus with a 747 attached to it. It's just the mass is so huge, and it was never designed for something that big. And so that's another thing that the OIG had mentioned.
Yeah, the Office of the Inspector General reported. Some people don't know.
Yeah, and one other problem with the gateway, real quick, is that it was envisioned as being a launching point for the Moon to Mars program. So we would use it theoretically to launch missions to Mars. However, its lifespan is only about 15 years. And from now to 15 years, it's very unlikely that we would be launching Mars missions from the gateway.
Well, Ryan says not a question. It's long overdue. So he thinks it should be scrapped. John says it started 10 years ago. Some of the first tech for it is already obsolete. When they get done, they will need to redo this old stuff. It will just be a never-ending circle of spending.
Yeah, well, ironically, it was almost all obsolete because it was reusing space shuttle technology.
And still costing us how much money?
Well, that was the selling point was, hey, we're going to use all this technology that we already own. It'll be cheaper. And it's turned out to be anything but.
I don't understand that. Okay. Complete waste of money, John says. Jake says, no, not yet. After Artemis 3, yes, then replace it with a Lunar Dragon setup. So
yeah, well, there is some valid points on that, because Artemis 3 is somewhat less complex because it doesn't use the gateway. So it would basically be the Orion and the Starship joining together, transferring the crews, and then the Starship, the HLS, would do its thing.
Right.
So possibly, I mean, you could make a case for that. Also, I think I have to look back, but I think the SLS needs to be the Block 1B, which means that it needs that new launch tower. So that may be a problem.
But also, do you really think HLS is going to be ready anytime soon? Like, aren't they going to have to test that out?
Yes. They have some mock-ups. There's actually a mock-up at Starbase, and we've actually got some recent information about what it looks like inside. And I know you probably know too, but
I wanted to go inside. It was off limits, but
yeah. So there is some development on that. There's been work with the airlock, of course, the spacesuits with Axiom. That's part of it. But you are absolutely right. It's never been tested as a ship that can be launched. They're going to need to. I actually think, wouldn't it be great if Polaris Dawn 2 or whatever it's going to be called would use something like a Dragon capsule to go up to a Starship that's decked out like the HLS, and then they can do on-orbit testing of that for a while and learn. I mean, I think that would be really cool. That way you don't have to launch people on the Starship, but you can get a lot of training on that. And then, of course, it needs to land. And
yes,
I've been talking about that. There's no landing pad anywhere to test it. So I find it hard to believe that the very first time they'll land it is on the moon.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Like, that seems like completely careless. We got to make sure that thing doesn't like tip over.
Yeah, I don't know. So there's no information from SpaceX on what the plan is for that. And if they were to, I think end of 2026 is unrealistic anyway, but let's just go with that. If that were the case, they need to do a demonstration landing on the moon probably 6 months before that, which means spring of 2026. And that's what, 16 months from now? I don't know.
Well, Al is apparently enjoying our conversation. Happy to support Ellie in space. Thanks for what you do. Thank you for supporting. And I'm actually really excited that we have the launch in just a few days. I feel like I've been sort of behind the scenes, really waiting for the next Starship launch. And I'm really excited to put out more content for you guys. So I'm glad that you enjoy it. But yeah, we have a pretty exciting week ahead of us. So
it'd be awesome.
I guess, ultimately, are you in favor, Joe, of canceling SLS?
You mean, canceling SLS or scrapping the Artemis program as it is right now?
I guess scrapping the entire program. Is that the answer?
I think the answer is probably going to be somewhere in between. I think they're going to try to salvage certain parts of it that make the sense. Like, I forget who it was that mentioned, who is it, Jake Painter, that maybe they keep Artemis 3 kind of the way it is right now. Mm-hmm. So they use the existing SLS that they have. They use the Orion capsule. They use the HLS version of the Starship. They do the landing. And while that is going on, then they are working, at the same time in parallel of what the follow-on is going to be. And that follow-on would probably be a Blue Origin, SpaceX kind of two-pronged approach, and using their two plans that are already in progress to try to do what Artemis 4 and beyond might do. So I think that's in my opinion, I think that's what's most likely to happen, because it also allows us to get back to the moon potentially faster.
Yeah, it's hard to really know when exactly we're going to be landing on the moon again. As we talk about this, it kind of feels like it's just going to keep getting pushed out, but
it is. And when we saw that congressional testimony, that was my biggest fear, is that all we're doing is we're going to push aside what we have. We're going to go back to something else, and it's going to take another decade for us to get to where we want to go. And we've already wasted over 50 years since Apollo 17. and we're no closer to the moon than we were in December of 1972. It's crazy when you think about it that way.
Yeah, it is. It is crazy. But when you start to look into the logistics of how many people are involved in this return to the moon, nationally and internationally, and just already how much money it's cost us, it's just.
Yeah. Here's sort of this is a Joe thought. And I actually had it when I was at that New Worlds conference again, down at Johnson Space Center. And we were hearing from experts, some of them from NASA, about how difficult things were, whether it's the radiation environment, whether it's this or this, and we need to study more and more and more. And my thought on that was like, I think we're doing this wrong. It's kind of like if Christopher Columbus kept studying everything and all the potential problems that might have happened, he would never have left Spain. And we'd still be talking about whether or not we're going to go across the ocean or not. I think even though there is risk, I think that there is a level of risk that needs to be accepted. And I think we need to go and figure it out when we get there. And we're going to find out that some of the things that we thought were problems weren't, and we were wasting time trying to solve them. And we're going to find other things are problems that we hadn't figured out, and we'll have to figure out the solutions. And I think that's really the way to go. And, I just thought that we were kind of like paralysis by analysis, and that's where we are right now. And we have so many partners. We try to spread it across the United States. We try to get all these international partners. We try to do all of this huge, gigantic, bureaucratic way of going back to the moon, and it's making it impossible. So slimming it down, going to maybe a couple of companies, maybe having a slightly different mission set, whatever, I think that's the way to go.
Yep. And just to be clear, your only real inkling of this was seeing that one Eric Berger post. Is there anything else that you've seen to support this sort of idea that there's internal discussion?
As far as putting it out there, well, I think it was Michael Bloomberg that put an article out just before the election, maybe about a week or so before, where he talked about scrapping it completely for these exact reasons: the cost, the complexity, the bureaucracy, the unsustainable nature of it. It was a pretty big op-ed that he put out there, and it kind of summarized much of what people like Eric Berger has been saying. And I think I have to go back and see. I don't want to speak completely out of turn here, but I thought Eric kind of agreed with it, or at least he had comments associated with that. And Michael Bloomberg's op-ed was based on the OIG reports that came out all earlier this year, which was talking about how unsustainable and how poorly managed everything was, and just the cost overrun on every single project. It's not just like one that was going, late or over budget. All of them are.
Okay, so let me just make sure I have the right thing shared here. Hold on. Sorry, I'm a producer and I'm trying to do it all. Okay, here we go. So NASA's $100 billion moon mission is going nowhere. This is by Michael Bloomberg. Like you said, the Artemis program, years behind schedule and billions over budget, should have taxpayers and presidents demanding answers. Should we read it?
Sure.
Okay, so this is...
notice when it was, October 17th, so about 2 weeks-ish before the election.
And they released it at 4 a.m. Central Time? Who's up then? That seems like a bad time to release an article. There are government boondoggles, and then there's NASA's Artemis program. More than half a century after Neil Armstrong's giant leap for mankind, Artemis was intended to land astronauts back on the moon. It has so far spent nearly $100 billion without getting anywhere, without anyone getting off the ground, yet its complexity and outrageous waste are still spiraling upward. The next U.S. president, Trump, should rethink the program in its entirety. As someone who greatly respects science and strongly supports space exploration, the more I have learned about Artemis, the more it has become apparent that it is a colossal waste of taxpayer money. The problems start with the mission, which is more political than scientific. There is little humans can do on the moon that robots cannot. Technology has come a long way since 1969, to put it mildly. We do not need another person on the moon to collect rocks or take scientific measurements. And the costs of putting people on the moon and of planning for their potential rescue, should complications arise, are truly astronomical. To understand the level of wasteful spending, forget the $1 billion in spacesuits that have yet to be delivered. That's pocket change compared to the rocket called the Space Launch System. The National Aeronautics and Space Administration's Inspector General estimates the program has so far burned through $23.8 billion. Each launch will likely cost at least $4 billion, quadruple initial estimates. This exceeds private sector costs many times over, yet it can launch only about once every 2 years, unlike SpaceX's rockets, and cannot be reused. Even if the Space Launch System is completed, there's a hitch. It isn't even powerful enough to actually get anyone to the moon, at least not in its current configuration. It will instead deposit its capsule called Orion into what's called, what you talked about, Joe, a near rectilinear halo orbit, which I wish that we had do you have that slide anywhere of the...
Oh, when I tried to put that together?
Maybe.
I don't know where it's at.
Okay.
If you think about, if this is the Earth and this is the moon, instead of going around the moon, I'll do it the other way, the Earth and the moon, instead of going around it this way, it goes around it this way, but it's highly elliptical. So it goes way far out and then it goes real close. It goes way far out. And by doing that, it's always being able to communicate to the Earth.
But it looks crazy if you actually see it. So near rectilinear halo orbit, here the capsule, which despite $20 billion being poured into it, currently has a faulty heat shield, which we all know about, must rendezvous with a landing spacecraft, which will then take the astronauts to the lunar surface. And getting the landing spacecraft into orbit before it can be propelled toward the moon to meet Orion is itself a complex process. Simple.
I would also add that the Orion could fit inside the payload bay of Starship.
Just saying. Simple, Artemis is not. A lot could go wrong. And that's before NASA adds its new space station into the mix. Known as the Gateway, it will cost more than $5 billion to build, require perhaps $1 billion in annual maintenance, and has no clear rationale. The idea is that in future missions, Orion might dock at the Gateway, 2 astronauts will exit and board the lander, and the remaining crew will sit in the station and observe their colleagues collecting rocks. Yeah. Unfortunately, that's not all. To build Gateway, NASA is adding a second stage to the Space Launch System called Block 1B. That is 6 years behind schedule, expected to cost $5.7 billion, and will add about $1 billion to every launch. To accommodate Block 1B, the agency is erecting a new launch tower called ML2, which is expected to cost $2.7 billion, more than 7 times the initial estimates, and doesn't have a plausible completion date. The company building ML2 has billed the government for 850,000 overtime hours just in the past 2 years. Holy crap.
Not only that, but on the OIG report, I think 7 of 9 bonus payments have been paid out to them.
A celestial irony is that none of this is necessary. A reusable SpaceX Starship will very likely be able to carry cargo and robots directly to the moon. No SLS, Orion, Gateway, Block 1B, or ML2 required at a small fraction of the cost. Its successful landing of the Starship booster was a breakthrough that demonstrated how far beyond NASA it is moving. Meanwhile, NASA canceling or postponing promising scientific programs, including the Veritas mission to Venus, the Viper lunar rover, and the NEO Surveyor telescope, intended to scan the solar system for hazardous asteroids. As Artemis consumes ever more of its budget, taxpayers in Congress should be asking, what on earth are we doing? And the next president should be held accountable for the answers.
Yeah, and one of the interesting things, that Viper lunar lander or lunar rover he's talking about, it was designed to scout out sites to be sure that it was where we want to land the Artemis missions. And by canceling it, we've kind of blinded ourselves to where we're going to land. Yeah, there are some alternatives, but they're not nearly as good, and you can't just move it around. And it'd be really bad if we go to the South Pole, we pick a crater to land next to because we think it's going to have water ice, but it turns out it's 5 craters away, not that one, and we can't get to it.
Wow. That was a really well-written article.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with most of what he says. The one thing I don't agree with, or at least I understand the spirit of his comment, but I would just point out that we do need humans to go, because it's the human part of us that wants to explore, wants to go out there. We want to see what it's like and be able to learn to live in a new location. It also, sparks that imagination of why we're doing all of this in the first place. So I think it is important to take people. Yeah, I think maybe a good mix between robots, people, and that kind of thing. But I think ultimately we do need to take people.
Yeah. Wow, what a crazy turn of events. And I guess we had yet to see not too long now.
News. Just a little bit of news over the last week that's thrown all this into turmoil.
Yeah, I mean, it's really, it's like so much to keep up with, and we're not that far away from January. So
no, I would, when we're down there watching Flight 6 and people are watching Flight 6, with all of what we just talked about and the uncertainty of where this is all going to go, I hope people really appreciate what's going on down at Starbase and the development of that rocket system, because that may be the system that we're using to go to the moon.
Yeah.
And it adds, many more levels of complexity to the fact that of what SpaceX is trying to do and the timelines that they're trying to do it in. So I hope we are able to get that point across and people understand and appreciate just what is going on down at Starbase.
Yeah. Oh, I can't wait. Can't wait.
It's going to be awesome.
Well, I'm going to start working on sort of a edited wrap up video, because I know not everyone can tune into the live stream and not everyone wants to watch an hour of us. So I'm going to make a shorter version of this. And I just want to thank everyone for joining us. Again, I'm very excited. I will have shirts down. Actually, this is the updated design. So Joe has
got the original one.
And then this one, as you can see, this actually says Gateway to Mars in Japanese, which you can Google Lens if you don't believe me.
I guess that's true. It does say something different than mine.
Yes, it does. So see, we're iterating on our design. That's so corny. Let me actually just put in a link in the description, only because we closed the store actually on the day of the launch. So if you want to get a shirt, order it now, and we'll be closing the store soon so we can actually get all these shirts out. But I do appreciate all of the support. And like I said, I'm going to be bringing a lot of goodies and stuff down to Starbase. So if you run into me, say, I demand a shirt from you, because you talked about it on your live stream and I waited until the end. So give it to me. Yeah. But yeah, I hope that you guys like the design. I have actually gotten so many compliments for this one in public, and it's really cool to say, oh yeah, this is actually like my design for my YouTube channel. But I think that the flame adds a really nice touch. And so hopefully you guys like it. Thank you so much for joining us. We're really excited to be back there in person. It was great to live stream with you on the last one, but man, did I resent being in Paris, which, you wouldn't think would be the case. But thank you guys so much, and I will see you very soon.